A year after the swarm incident, the Great Hall of Understanding on Earth hosted representatives from every known spacefaring species. The crystalline forms of the bright ones sparkled alongside the scaled bodies of the crawlers, while dozens of other alien species filled the ancient building that had once been a war museum. Captain James Walker, who had made first contact, sat next to Tom Gray, the historian who had discovered the pattern in the archives. They watched as Linda Stone, the security chief who had handled the pirates, gave Admiral Cooper a respectful nod. On the main stage, Ambassador Hart prepared to address the gathered species. A year ago, Hart began, many of you feared humanity. You saw our potential for violence and assumed we would follow the path of the destroyers. He gestured to the hall around them. This building tells our story. Once, it housed weapons. Now, it houses understanding. The aliens watched as holographic displays activated, showing scenes from the past year, the pirate incident, the council meeting, the discovery of the ancient ruins, and the resolution of the swarm crisis. You asked us why humans avoid conflict, Hart continued. The answer was always here, in our museums, in our memories, in our choices. We avoid conflict not because we fear it, but because we understand it too well. Light through storm, the first bright one to meet humans, floated forward. We have studied your history since first contact. Every other species that survived multiple near-extinction events became more aggressive, more violent. Yet humans learned to create instead of destroy. Linda Stone finished, standing up from her seat. When I confronted those pirates, I could have killed them all. It would have been easy. Instead, we shared coffee. And now they work as legitimate traders. The crawler captain who had once threatened the Pathfinder clicked his mandibles in agreement. They offered us a better way. Not because they were weak, but because they were strong enough to show mercy. Admiral Cooper stepped forward next. When the swarm came, we had weapons that could have annihilated them. Using them would have been simpler, faster. But humanity's greatest strength isn't our capacity for violence. It's our determination to find another way. Tom Gray held up a data crystal containing the records from the ancient ruins. We found evidence of species who walked our path before. They survived their wars and thought it made them mighty. Their might led them to extinction. Humans survived our wars and realized it made us responsible. Responsible, Hart repeated. That's the word that defines humanity's relationship with conflict. We are very, very good at violence. That's precisely why we avoid it. We know exactly what we're capable of, and we choose to be better. The hall fell silent as the holographs showed Earth's history, the wars, the rebuilding, the monuments to peace built alongside memorials to war. Then it showed the present, human ships helping to evacuate civilians during the swarm crisis, medical teams treating injured pirates, scientists working with alien researchers to understand the past. The galaxy feared us because we are good at violence, Hart said quietly. Now you understand. We avoid conflict because we are better at peace. Our history taught us that true strength lies not in the ability to take life, but in the choice to preserve it. Captain Walker stood up, remembering that first meeting with the Bright Ones. When we first met, you were confused by our desire to talk rather than fight. You thought we were naive. Now you know. Every time we choose words over weapons, we demonstrate not our weakness, but our wisdom. The gathered species began to glow, pulse, and signal in their various ways, showing agreement and understanding. The fear that had once filled the galaxy when humans were mentioned had been replaced by something else, respect, not for humanity's power, but for their restraint. As the assembly ended, Hart looked out over the gathered species and smiled. The galaxy had finally understood the truth about humans. They weren't peaceful because they were weak. They weren't calm because they were afraid. They avoided conflict precisely because they knew how good they were at it. In the end, humanity's greatest victory hadn't come from winning wars, but from choosing not to fight them. And that, more than any show of force, had earned them their place among the stars. The emergency alarms at Earth Defense Command filled the command center with pulsing red light. Admiral Jane Cooper stood before the main display, her face illuminated by the holographic representation of an incoming fleet. Beside her, the alien commander Dawn Singer's crystalline form flickered with nervous energy. "They're not slowing down," Dawn Singer transmitted. "The swarm has already consumed 3 systems. They don't respond to communication. They don't negotiate. They only feed and grow." Cooper watched as the mass of biomechanical ships moved closer to the populated sectors. The swarm had emerged from deep space 2 weeks ago, a horrifying fusion of organic and mechanical parts that devoured everything in its path. Now it threatened both human and Bright One territories. "The combined fleet is assembled," Dawn Singer continued. "But our weapons, they barely scratch their outer layers. We need..." The crystalline being hesitated. "You need humanity's weapons," Cooper finished quietly. "The ones we never use. The ones we keep locked away." "Yes," Dawn Singer's form dimmed. "We know you have weapons of unimaginable power. Weapons that could stop the swarm. The galaxy has feared those weapons for years. Now we pray you will use them." Cooper closed her eyes, remembering the ancient oaths that came with her rank. Every human admiral took them. Promises about when and how humanity's full military might could be unleashed. "Show me the civilian evacuation status," she ordered. The display shifted, showing thousands of ships fleeing the swarm's path. Many wouldn't make it in time. "Admiral," her tactical officer spoke up. "The locked protocols. Project Prometheus. It could end this in hours." Cooper knew he was right. Humanity had weapons that could tear reality itself apart. Weapons they'd built during darker times and kept as reminders of paths not taken. Using them would save millions of lives. It would also prove every fear the galaxy had about humans absolutely right. "How long until the swarm reaches the Bright One colony on New Haven?" she asked. 6 hours, Dawn Singer answered. "My people, they cannot evacuate in time. Billions will die." Cooper pressed her hands against the command console, feeling its cool surface under her fingers. She thought about all the times humanity had faced extinction-level threats, all the times they'd chosen overwhelming force, and all the times they'd regretted it. "No," she said finally. "No." Dawn Singer's lights pulsed in shock. "You would let billions die." Cooper straightened up. "I said no to using the weapons that would make us what we fear. I didn't say no to stopping the swarm." She turned to her crew. "Get me the mining fleet. All of them. And contact the terraforming court. I want every atmosphere processor in range." Understanding dawned in her tactical officer's eyes. "The Genesis Protocol." "Exactly." Cooper allowed herself a small smile. Humanity didn't survive its violent past by only learning better ways to destroy. We also learned better ways to create. The next few hours were a blur of activity. Mining ships positioned themselves in the swarm's path, their massive excavation beams repurposed. Terraforming ships moved into formation, their atmosphere processors running at full power. It wasn't a weapon of mass destruction. It was a tool of mass creation. "Now," Cooper ordered. The mining beams activated, not to destroy but to build. They pulled elements from nearby asteroids, while the terraforming ships shaped them into a new microenvironment. Right in the swarm's path, they created something that hadn't existed before, a massive cloud of precisely engineered bacteria. "The swarm is partially organic," Cooper explained to a stunned Dawn Singer. "So we give them something organic to deal with, something that likes to eat biomechanical materials." They watched as the swarm hit the bacterial cloud. At first, nothing seemed to happen. Then, slowly, the outer ships began to dissolve as the bacteria found their way into the hybrid systems. "You didn't destroy them," Dawn Singer whispered. "You converted them, changed them." "Sometimes the best way to end a fight is to change its nature," Cooper replied. "Humanity learned that the hard way. We keep our terrible weapons not to use them, but to remind us to find better solutions. As the swarm dissolved into harmless components, Dawn Singer's lights pulsed with a new kind of understanding. Humans weren't peaceful because they couldn't fight. They were peaceful because they had learned there were better ways to solve problems than fighting. Even in the face of extinction, they had chosen to create rather than destroy. Deep within an ancient ruins on a forgotten world, Dr. Robert Wells brushed dust from a metallic panel. His alien colleague, Pulse Reader, hovered nearby, their crystalline form providing light in the darkness. They had spent 3 months exploring this dead civilization, but today felt different. Today, they were close to something big. These markings, Robert muttered, they're unlike anything we've seen in the ruins so far. His fingers traced symbols that seemed to glow faintly at his touch. They look almost like radiation warnings. Pulse Reader's lights flickered with concern. Perhaps we should not proceed, if this site is contaminated. No, Robert interrupted, checking his sensors. No radiation. These are just warnings. Very, very old warnings. He pressed his hand against the center of the panel, and the wall silently split open, revealing a vast chamber beyond. Both researchers stood frozen at the entrance. The chamber was filled with holographic projections, still functioning after countless millennia. They showed cities burning, weapons of unimaginable power, and scenes of devastation that made Robert's breath catch in his throat. By the eternal light, Pulse Reader whispered in Robert's mind. These are the destroyers. Robert walked slowly through the projections, his scientist's mind cataloging details even as his human heart ached at the familiar scenes. No, he said softly, not the destroyers. These are the ones who came before them, the ones who made the same mistakes we did. The holograms shifted, showing a species that looked surprisingly similar to humans in basic form. They had built great cities, reached for the stars, and then turned their power against themselves. Look at the dates. Robert pointed to symbols running along the base of each projection. These events happened in sequence, just like Earth's world wars. They developed nuclear weapons, just like us. They nearly destroyed themselves with climate change, just like us. But then, the next set of holograms showed something different. Unlike humanity's history of eventual cooperation, these beings had chosen another path. They had emerged from their wars not with wisdom, but with a burning desire to prove their strength. They had turned their weapons outward, becoming the ancient threat that had later inspired the destroyers. This is why the galaxy fears us, Robert said, understanding dawning in his eyes. They've seen this pattern before. A species survives its own violence and then becomes even more violent. But they don't understand. We're different. We broke the pattern. Pulse Reader moved closer to the holograms, their crystalline form reflecting the ancient images. How? How did humans choose differently? Robert touched a projection showing a devastated city, so similar to images from human history books. Because we remember, every human child learns about our wars. We build peace monuments next to our war memorials. We keep our weapons as reminders, not promises. He walked to the chamber center, where a final hologram showed the ancient species' last recording. They saw survival as proof of their superiority. We saw it as a warning. That's the difference. The recording played, showing a being speaking in a language lost to time. But its meaning was clear from the images that accompanied it. They had survived their wars and believed it made them mighty. They had taken that might to the stars, becoming the first great terror of the galaxy. And then they fell, Pulse Reader observed, watching the final images. Their own violence eventually destroyed them. Yes, Robert agreed. Just like the destroyers who followed their example. It's a cycle. Survive violence, embrace it, spread it, fall to it. But humans survived violence and rejected it. Pulse Reader finished, their lights pulsing with new understanding. You keep your strength not to use it, but to remember why you mustn't. Robert nodded, taking samples and readings from the chamber. This site isn't just a piece of history. It's a mirror. It shows us what we could have become, what some feared we would become, but most importantly, it shows us why we chose differently. As they left the chamber, Robert looked back one last time at the ancient warnings. Humanity had walked the same path as those ancient beings, faced the same choices. But where they had chosen pride, humans had chosen wisdom. Where they had chosen to prove their strength, humans had chosen to prove their restraint. The real strength of humanity, Robert realized, wasn't in surviving their violent past. It was in making sure that past remained just that, the past. The Galactic Council chamber sparkled like a jeweled crown, with representatives from 50 species seated in rising tiers around the central platform. Ambassador William Hart stood calmly in the center, hands folded behind his back, as Council Elder Starvoice read the proposal. Given the recent discovery of humanity's violent history, Starvoice's thoughts echoed through the chamber, and their demonstrated capacity for efficient combat, as shown in the pirate incident. We propose restrictions on human expansion into new territories. Hart noticed how the crystalline form of Starvoice flickered with nervous energy. The incident with the pirates had spread through the galaxy like wildfire, but not in the way humans had hoped. Instead of seeing it as proof of humanity's restraint, many species now saw it as a terrifying demonstration of human capabilities. "If I may respond," Hart said quietly, his voice carrying in the perfect acoustics of the chamber. "I find it interesting that you fear us more after we safely detained pirates without a single casualty than when we were simply trading with them." A representative from the crawler species, their multiple eyes blinking rapidly, spoke up. "That is precisely the point. You subdued an entire pirate crew in minutes, without weapons." Hart smiled gently. "Would you have preferred we used weapons?" The chamber fell silent. "Let me tell you a story," Hart continued. "Once on Earth, there was a man who became a master of combat. He trained for decades until he could defeat any opponent. Do you know what he did with this skill? He opened a garden shop. He grew flowers. When asked why, he said that once you truly understand violence, you want nothing to do with it." Starvoice's lights pulsed with confusion. "You speak in riddles, human. Your species possesses tremendous military capability, yet you choose not to use it. You could have conquered many worlds by now." "Could have," Hart agreed. "Just like we could have destroyed the pirates. Could have shot first during first contact. Could have responded to this proposal with threats. But what would that accomplish, except to prove we're exactly what you fear?" He walked slowly around the platform, making eye contact with each council member. "You fear us because we're good at violence. No, you fear us because we choose not to use it. Because you don't understand that choice." A holographic display activated above the platform, showing scenes from Earth's history. Wars, devastation, rebuilding, peace. Every species in this chamber evolved through cooperation, Hart continued. Violence was rare in your histories. But humans, we had to learn cooperation the hard way. Through millions of deaths. Through cities turned to ash. Through mistakes so terrible we still build monuments to remind us never to repeat them. The chamber was completely still now, every alien eye and sensory organ fixed on the human ambassador. "You want to restrict human expansion because you think we're dangerous. Look at those images. We already restrict ourselves. Every human ship has weapons, yes, but also libraries full of peace treaties. Our children learn about war not to glorify it, but to understand its cost. We train for combat and pray we never need it." Hart gestured to the proposal floating in the air. "You fear what we could do if we chose violence. Instead, you should consider what it means that we don't. That we've seen the darkest parts of ourselves and chose to be better." Starvoice's crystalline form dimmed thoughtfully. "And if someone forces violence upon you, then they learn what the pirates learned," Hart said simply. "That humans are very, very good at ending conflicts quickly. We just prefer to do it without violence when possible." The chamber erupted in discussion, lights flashing and thoughts mixing in the air. Hart stood quietly, waiting. Finally, Star Voice spoke again. "We will reconsider the proposal. Perhaps we have been looking at this from the wrong angle. If humans can teach us about choosing peace despite having the capability for war." Hart nodded. "That's all we've ever wanted. To share what we've learned. Because believe me, those lessons came at a terrible price." As he left the chamber, Hart heard the beginnings of a new conversation behind him. Not about restricting humanity, but about learning from them. Sometimes, he reflected, the best way to prove you aren't a threat is to show exactly why you could be, and why you choose not to be. The pirate leader Black Mark stood in the bridge of his ship, all 6 eyes fixed on the display showing their captives. The raid had gone perfectly, too perfectly. They had captured both a human transport vessel and a Bright One research ship in the same ambush. The crystalline aliens were cowering exactly as expected. But the humans were just sitting there, looking almost bored. "Tell me again what they said." Black Mark growled at his communications officer. "They asked if we like some coffee while we discuss terms." The officer replied, mandibles twitching nervously. "Their security chief, the female called Linda Stone, she just keeps smiling at us." Black Mark's scales rippled with irritation. He'd heard stories about humans and their strange reactions to threats. But this was unsettling. No species should be this calm with pirates holding their ship. In the holding cell, Linda Stone sat cross-legged on the floor, watching the guard through half-closed eyes. Next to her, the crystalline forms of the Bright Ones flickered with fear and confusion. "Why are you so calm?" one of them transmitted. "They will kill us all." Linda smiled slightly. "No, they won't. Right now, they're making their first mistake. Their second mistake will be when they separate us. Their third mistake will be when they try to prove they're serious." The guard slammed his weapon against the force field. "Quiet in there." Linda's smile didn't waver. She'd been in security for 15 years, and she knew exactly how this would play out. The pirates would try to show their dominance. They would threaten. And then they would learn. Black Mark decided it was time to show these humans some real fear. He ordered his crew to separate the prisoners, the Bright Ones in one cell, the humans in another. As Linda was led past him, she actually nodded politely, like this was all perfectly normal. "You don't seem to understand your situation." Black Mark snarled at her. "We are the Crimson Band. We destroy ships and space crews for fun." "Oh, I understand perfectly," Linda replied. "I just think you should know that humans have a protocol for hostage situations. We call it the Miranda Protocol. You might want to look it up." Black Mark didn't like the way she said that. He definitely didn't like how the other human prisoners were all suddenly sitting up straighter, their expressions changing from bored to alert. He accessed the ship's database, searching for information about this Miranda Protocol. The results made his scales turn pale. The database had only one line: Miranda Protocol, named after the first and last alien pirates to take human hostages. That's when the ship's lights went out. In the darkness, Linda's voice carried clearly down the corridors. "Fun fact about humans: we're one of the few species that evolved as pursuit predators. We can see pretty well in low light, and we're very, very patient." The emergency lights flickered on, casting red shadows everywhere. 3 of Black Mark's crew were already unconscious, and he hadn't even heard them fall. Another fun fact: Linda's voice continued, now seeming to come from everywhere at once. "Every human transport ship has at least one security officer trained in zero-gravity combat and hostage recovery. Would you like to guess what I did before I became a security chief?" The next few minutes were a blur of motion and precision. By the time the main lights came back on, Linda was sitting in Black Mark's command chair, while his entire crew was neatly restrained and seated along the walls. None of them could quite explain how they'd been subdued so quickly and quietly. The Bright Ones, still in their cell, had watched it all through their natural light-sensing abilities. Their crystalline forms flickered with a new kind of fear now, not of the pirates, but of the realization of what their peaceful human allies were capable of. Linda activated the ship's comm system. "This is Security Chief Stone. The situation has been resolved. No casualties. Would anyone like some coffee while we wait for the authorities?" Black Mark, tied up and sitting on his own bridge, finally understood. Humans didn't avoid conflict because they were weak. They avoided it because they were so very, very good at it. They didn't need to prove their strength. They had nothing to prove. And that made them the most dangerous species of all. "I would like some coffee," he said quietly, all 6 eyes fixed on the floor. "And perhaps we could discuss a career change." Linda's smile returned. "Now that's a much better attitude. Cream and sugar." The Galactic Library Station hung in space like a giant silver snowflake, its crystalline arms stretching out in every direction. Tom Gray walked through its gleaming corridors, his footsteps echoing off walls that hadn't seen a human visitor in their 1,000-year history. His guide, an alien archivist called Light Seeker, floated beside him. Like all bright ones, Light Seeker's crystalline form sparkled as it moved, but their lights seemed dimmer than usual today. The historical archives are this way. Light Seeker's thoughts touched Tom's mind. "Though I must admit, I don't understand your interest in war records. Such a disturbing subject." Tom smiled politely. "Understanding the past helps us build a better future." He didn't mention that he was really here to understand why the galactic community seemed so nervous around humans lately. They entered a vast chamber filled with shimmering data crystals, each containing the recorded history of a different civilization. Light Seeker guided them to a small section near the back. "These contain records of species that nearly destroyed themselves," Light Seeker explained. "A rather small collection, thankfully. Most races learn cooperation early in their development." Tom started scanning the records, and his blood ran cold. Every catastrophic war, every civilization-ending conflict, every species that had nearly wiped itself out. They all had one thing in common. None of them had survived. Except humans. "Light Seeker." Tom's voice was barely a whisper. "How many species have had nuclear weapons?" The crystalline being's lights pulsed thoughtfully. 17 have discovered the technology. 15 destroyed themselves. 1 banned the research before completion. And then, there's yours. "And how many species have had multiple world wars?" "Only 3. 2 extinct. And humans." Tom kept reading, and the pattern became clearer. Biological weapons. Humans were the only survivors. Climate warfare. Humans alone had pulled back from the brink. Every civilization that had walked the paths of war that humanity had walked was now nothing but a cautionary tale in these archives. "I don't understand." Light Seeker's thoughts carried genuine confusion. "Your species has survived more conflicts that should have been extinction events than all other known races combined. Yet now you avoid even minor confrontations. The coffee trading incident with the pirates has become quite famous." Tom touched one of the data crystals, watching humanity's violent history play out in its depths. "Have you ever burned yourself?" Light Seeker. "No. Our forms don't experience pain as yours do. When a human child burns their hand, they learn to fear fire. Not because they're weak, but because they understand its power. They respect it." Tom turned to face the archivist. "Humanity didn't just survive all those conflicts. We learned from them." Light Seeker's form dimmed further. "The other races, they fear you might be like the Destroyers." The Destroyers. An ancient race, the only other species to survive multiple near-extinction conflicts. They became the greatest threat this galaxy had ever seen. That's why many council members are nervous about humanity's expansion. Tom laughed, but there was no humor in it. "The difference is, the Destroyers probably never developed thousands of different ways to say peace in their languages. They probably never created art about the horrors of war or built countless monuments to remind themselves of their mistakes." He gestured at the archives around them. "Every species here either never learned about large-scale conflict or learned too late. Humanity is unique. We learned, we survived, and we chose to be better. We don't avoid conflict because we're scared of fighting. We avoid it because we're scared of becoming what we could be if we didn't. Light Seeker's lights pulsed rapidly as understanding began to dawn. Your peace isn't born of ignorance. No, Tom agreed. It's born of wisdom. Every human knows that we could end conflicts quickly and violently if we wanted to. But we also know exactly what that path leads to. We've walked it too many times. As they left the archive chamber, Tom noticed other alien visitors watching him with new eyes. The story would spread, he knew. The truth about humanity's pacifism would travel through the galaxy, and maybe then they would understand. Humans weren't peaceful because they were weak. They were peaceful because they were the only ones who truly understood what the alternative meant. The gentle hum of the Pathfinder's engines filled the bridge as Captain James Walker stared at the strange crystalline ship floating before them. Its surface sparkled like diamonds in the light of a distant sun, making the human vessel look dull in comparison. This was humanity's first contact with the beings they would come to know as the Bright Ones, and Walker's hands were sweating. "Their signal is coming through now, Captain," First Officer Mary Reed announced, her fingers moving across the control panel. "Translation software is running." Walker straightened his uniform and nodded. "Put them on screen." The view screen flickered to life, revealing a being that seemed to be made entirely of translucent crystal. Light danced through its form, creating patterns that somehow formed words in Walker's mind. "Greetings, humans of Earth," the crystalline being's thoughts echoed in their heads. "We are pleased to make your acquaintance. I am Light Through Storm, speaking for the Bright Ones." Walker smiled, trying to hide his nervousness. "I am Captain James Walker of the Earth exploration vessel Pathfinder. We come in peace and friendship." The crystal being's lights flickered in what seemed like amusement. "Of course you do. All species do. We have observed your kind from afar. You are interesting, most peculiar in your ways." Before Walker could ask what they meant, Reed's console started blinking red. "Captain, 3 ships just dropped out of FTL. They're not responding to hails." The crystal being's lights pulsed rapidly. "Pirates. The Crimson Band. They plague these sectors. We must prepare for combat." Walker raised his hand calmly. "Let's not jump to conclusions. Open a channel to the incoming vessels." The Bright One's confusion radiated through their mental link. "You wish to talk while they approach with weapons charged. Trust me," Walker said, both to his new alien acquaintance and his nervous crew. The view screen split, showing a rough-looking alien with scales and too many eyes. Walker recognized the species from the database, a crawler known for their quick movements and quick tempers. "This is Captain Walker of the Earth vessel Pathfinder. We're in the middle of a diplomatic meeting. Perhaps we could discuss whatever brings you here." The crawler captain barked out a laugh. "Discussion? You must be new to space. This is a robbery. Your ship, the Crystal Ship, both now belong to the Crimson Band. Resist, and we space your crews." Walker noticed his first officer's hand hovering over the weapons console. He gave her a subtle shake of his head. "That would be unfortunate for everyone involved. You see, we humans have a saying. Those who make peaceful resolution impossible make violent resolution inevitable. I'd really prefer we stick to the peaceful options." The pirate's leader leaned forward, multiple eyes blinking in sequence. "You threaten us with your tiny exploration vessel." "Not threatening, just explaining. You see, humans don't like violence. We avoid it when we can. There's a reason for that, which I'd be happy to demonstrate if you insist. But first, did you know that the Pathfinder is carrying a shipment of rare earth coffee? Quite valuable, I hear. Perhaps we could discuss a trade." The Bright One's confusion grew stronger. "You offer them drinks while they target our vessels." The crawler captain's eyes narrowed. "Coffee, the brown stimulant. The very same. Much easier to trade than to risk lives, wouldn't you agree? We also have chocolate." There was a long pause. The crawler's eyes blinked rapidly. You would trade, just like that. Of course, violence is messy. Trade is profitable. Simple math. Really. The pirates' ships maintained their position, but their weapons powered down. Walker could feel the Bright One's astonishment as the situation de-escalated from imminent battle to a business negotiation. An hour later, watching the pirates' ships disappear into FTL with their cargo holds full of coffee and chocolate instead of stolen goods and prisoners, Light Through Storm finally spoke again. We have never seen such a thing. You had weapons. You could have fought. Walker turned to the crystalline being. We could have, but humans learned long ago that just because you can fight doesn't mean you should. Trust me, there's a very good reason we prefer to avoid conflict. What reason is that? Walker's smile held a hint of sadness. Let's hope you never have to find out. The Bright One's lights flickered in what might have been uncertainty, marking the beginning of the galaxy's long journey to understanding why humans, despite their capability for violence, always sought peace first. They didn't yet realize that they were dealing with a species that had perfected the art of war so thoroughly that they'd learned to despise it.